Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research-based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lori Hangs, parent of three in three different life stages. One's launched, one in college, and one in high school. And I'm also a parenting educator. And today we are continuing our conversation on temperament.
Yes.
Season 3, yay, is all about parenting with temperament in mind. So when we look at this entire season and we think about temperament, we want to think about how it impacts your parenting. But just a quick reminder on what temperament is and what it isn't before we start. So temperament is our predisposition to how we react. It's inborn, it's genetic, and it's with us from the very beginning. So you might be wondering, how is it different from personality? Good question. So if we think about temperament as that foundational piece, so we start with temperament, and then we layer on top of temperament the environment that we grow up in. We layer on our own growth and development as we age. We layer on life experiences. And as we layer all that on, it forms our personality. But when we think about temperament, it's always been there.
And so, of course, we're going to talk about the research and reality of temperament today, looking at one specific trait. But remember, the research we're looking at is some of that original research from Thomas and Chess. And then also, research from James Cameron and his colleagues at Kaiser Permanente. They have been tracking kids' temperament, thousands of kids' temperament profiles for over 30 years. So lots of great insight there. And we know from this research that everybody gets all 9 traits. The question is, did you get a little or did you get a lot?
How
so
much
as we think,
did you get?
right? How much? And so as we think about that with our kids and with ourselves, exploring that temperament, where we fall on each of those traits. We also want to remind you that we have a lot of resources from the topics we've already covered in temperament, and we're going to continue adding to that list on our temperament page on our website at scienceofparenting.org. So you can check out those resources. You can find you might be able to take a temperament profile, like Lori assigned to me, and all those things are found on our website. But for today, we get to talk about distractibility or perceptiveness, right? As Mary Sheedy Krasinka calls it.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
love this one too.
Let's look at how we define it and talk a little bit about how it plays into our role as a parent. So distractibility is about how much we notice things. I love that Mary Sheedy Krasinka talks about it as how am I distracted away from my focus? And the researchers do also call this perceptiveness. So how much is my child noticing other people, colors, noises, objects around them? Do they forget what I asked them to do because something else caught their attention? So that idea of distractibility, but at the same time thinking of it as perceptiveness. So how might you describe it in your own words?
This is another one of those traits that I just love. Like either end of the continuum, I think is so fascinating. But I actually think of just like the phrase notice, like that particular phrase really sticks with me of like, do I notice? Am I taking in all of those things around me? Am I noticing these really maybe like what others might deem not important, right? Taking in all that extra stuff. So that noticing. And I really, really love the word perceptive.
Yes.
I think that's like a very positive way for us to talk about this trait of taking lots of things in. So how do you describe it kind of in your own words?
So I chuckle because I think that Kenzie DeYoung and I kind of think of it in the same way. It's that, did I catch the shiny object? Did I notice that? Or, sometimes it'll be like squirrel, and you catch, you just all of a sudden catch that, right? So I too love the idea of perceptiveness and that idea of perceiving the little things, those shiny objects. Yeah.
I feel like I've heard you say like catching the subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Like picking up on those little subtle things.
Mm.
I feel like that's some of the ways I've heard you talk about this trait too.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And so we know that, right? Every kid, every adult got a certain level of perceptiveness. Did they get a little? Did they get a lot? On that continuum. And so I do want to explore that continuum, but I also want to remind everybody, our listeners, this trait in particular, sometimes people might perceive that we might be talking about a medical diagnosis like ADHD or something like that. What we are talking about today on our podcast is the temperament trait of distractibility or perceptiveness,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of that normal range, of typical development that kids and adults have. So just talking about temperament here today.
And I love that you talk about there being this normal range, which
Yes.
means that there are children, adults who are highly distractible. And that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean there's some medical diagnosis. It just means that there is a normal range of
Yes.
distractibility. There's a normal range of perceptiveness. So
Yes.
let's start on one end of that continuum and let's start
Mm-hmm.
with the less distractible or less
Yes.
perceptive child. And these kids, they might not be easily swayed by those subtle messages around
Mm.
them. They might miss the details. And it's important to remember that they may not be intentionally ignoring you or ignoring things, but they might just miss it and keep going right along with what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about this example of like reading the book,
Hmm.
with persistence, like, am I going to finish? How important is it to get back to that task? I feel like, sometimes we confuse this distractibility with perceptiveness or sensitivity. But I think the difference is, if we think about it in that example of reading a book,
Hmm.
a less distractible child is able to hone in on that book and shut out, right? They're
Hmm.
not as distracted by the things around them. So even if there's a lot going on, they have that ability to kind of hone in and tune out, which is a skill that I maybe wish I had a little more of, or a
Yes.
natural ability, I might want to say. But so, yes, that less distractible child might be honed in on the activity they're doing. And so they're naturally able to tune out those things. It might not be intentional that you had to say their name 6 times. They're not being obstinate necessarily, just
Exactly.
they're honed in and tuned out.
Yes, exactly. I love that. I can see it visually in my head of
Mm,
just being honed in. I love that. So
yes.
then on the other side of the continuum is the child that is highly distractible or highly perceptive. And
Hmm.
this child is literally constantly taking in all of the sights and the sounds around them. And think of them as literally being barraged by messages in their brain. And they're taking in so much, they might not be able to sort out which message is the important message to be hearing right now, or which is the most important message that I should be responding to right now. They might have a rich imagination and all those messages are coming at them. And what they really need is for you to help them to figure out which message they need to hone in on. And it's really worth pointing out here as well that it takes a lot of energy for a distractible, highly perceptive child to pay attention to things. And so by the end of really honing in and paying attention, frankly, they might just be exhausted.
Oh, I relate to that so much. So, my temperament, I fall on that highly distractible end. And actually, just recently, I was out and about with my kids, and we were in the pool, and my son was having a hard time, and
Mm.
he's about 1 right now, and he didn't really want to be in the pool. He was kind of fussy. He wanted to sit on the edge. And then it was just like, okay, I really need to pay attention to him and be alert of
Mhm.
what's going on to keep him safe here. While my daughter wanted me to catch her as she jumped off the edge or pay attention to this thing she was
Mhm.
doing and all of that stuff. And I realized after being at the pool and focusing so much energy on trying to keep my son safe, I was exhausted from tuning everything else out, the music and my daughter trying to get my attention. And
Mhm.
ooh, that highly distractible, that's exhausting
It
to hone in
is.
like that.
It is. And think about all those sights and sound that the highly perceptive person child
Mm,
is catching. And then
yes.
at the same time, the less perceptive child, they might not be hearing the lifeguard at the pool telling them don't run. And it's not that they're
Yes.
ignoring them, it's just there are all of these other things, and they're pretty much honed in onto, being in line at the diving board, right?
Yeah. Yes. Well, and my mom tells this story of me when I was a little kid. Actually, we had gone to visit a family friend who had recently moved, and she was having trouble remembering where the house was. And I
Mhm.
was maybe, I don't know, I was early school age, like maybe 6 or 7. And I just remember from the back seat, I was like, well, mom, the house number is 1819.
Mm,
And
mhm.
sure enough, the house number was 1819, and my mom was able to find the house. And I've heard her tell that story a couple times. And then now I think
Mhm.
those are the kinds of details that I see my daughter pick up on.
Exactly.
When we would drive to school, if I took a different way, mom, the blue house is on the wrong side of the car. She picks up
Exactly.
on those details. So the apple has definitely not fallen far from the tree on the distractibility perceptiveness trait here.
That's what we call it too. Apples and trees, Laura, apples and trees.
Yes, yes. So as we think about, this kind of continuum and our own distractibility level and our child's, where does your family kind of fall? Everybody, did they get a little or get a lot?
So I think about my 3 children, and I think that if I include myself in this mix, that there
Mhm.
are 2 of us who are more highly distractible, more
Mhm.
perceptive than the other 2 of us. And then of those 2 that are less distractible, one is definitely much less perceptive in noticing
Mm.
those things. And so I can see there are times where, gosh, her and I are totally missing each other's cues. She's not catching my
Mm.
subtle cues, and I'm
Mhm.
forgetting that she's not being intentionally, obstinate. She's not ignoring me
Yes,
intentionally. I'm just being way too subtle.
yes, and it's just different, the different temperament levels and the different experiences.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In my family, my co-parent as well as my 2 kids, we all actually tend to fall on the, like, mildly to very distractible.
Mhm.
And so we actually all kind of fall on the same end of the continuum,
Mm.
for us. So sometimes that is a challenge though too.
It can
Actually,
be.
I have to tell you this, the other day, my daughter and I were sitting together in the chair in the living room, and I was looking out the back window of the house, just like, in the zone, like daydreamy.
Mhm.
And then I like come out of it, shake my head a little bit, and I'm like, oh, you remember maybe saying something to me. And I look down at her. She's looking out the front window, daydreamy, like looking at the birds outside. And then I just like, I had to laugh, and I start laughing, and she like shakes her head a little bit, like, oh, what, mom?
Oh,
And I was
what?
like, we were
That's
both distracted.
oh, that's cute. Uh,
Yes. So one thing we do, of course, like to keep in mind with our different temperament traits is that as kids grow and age, that temperament's going to stay the same, but there's going to be times when, because of the developmental tasks they're working on, that it's really that certain traits will come, kind of rear their head. You'll really see those temperament traits kind of come to play. And we
mhm.
know with perceptiveness and that actually kind of increases as we grow. Those skills
It
associated with
does.
that noticing. And so as we think about these ages and stages in perceptiveness, I love to kind of go through some examples here.
Sure.
So let's start little like we always do. Let's start with those infants and toddlers. How might we see this kind of perceptiveness or distractibility play out? Let's start with, the higher end.
Okay. So
More
just
distractible infant or toddler.
just developmentally, we think about infants and toddlers taking in their whole world. And so, in general, because of who they are as little human beings, it's honestly like science class 24/7.
Mhm.
So let's talk about the more distractible infant or toddler, and we look at the fact that that infant, they might not nurse very easily because they're excitable and they want to see what's going around them. And the same thing with that distractible or highly perceptive toddler. They might not sit and eat their entire meal because they're so distracted with what else is going on around them.
Yes. And so what about on that less distractible end? What might we notice about a baby or toddler who's less distractible?
Yeah. So the less distractible infant or toddler, one of the things that we talk about with tools and techniques in terms of guidance and discipline is that this idea of we can redirect an infant or toddler.
Mm.
Well, guess what? If you have a less persistent, or I'm sorry, well, guess what? If you have a less distractible or less perceptive toddler, they're not going to be easily redirected. And so
Mm.
that handy temperament or that handy guidance and discipline tool just isn't going to work as quickly for them as it does for other children.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on up the ages here. So let's look at preschool. So we know that lots of kids, they're starting, preschoolers are starting some of that school stuff. We see certain things that are going on in the school day. What are kind of some traits or some tasks that might be going on where we might see this distractibility come to play? Again, let's start with that more distractible child.
Okay, so a more distractible preschooler is that child that, during circle time, they
Mm.
might notice everything else around them except for what the teacher is doing. So they might catch that spider climbing up the wall in the corner. They
Mm.
might hear the sirens going off in the distance outside. They might feel their another child behind them kind of wiggling. And as a teacher, a preschool teacher, you might get frustrated because they're constantly distracted by things that are going on around them,
Yeah, they're taking in all that stuff.
taking it all in.
So what about the less distractible child then?
Well, in that same scenario, think about during circle time, the children are all sitting there, and the less distractible child is really focused and honed in on that book that the teacher is reading.
Mm.
And sometimes preschools use that circle time as a transition to move from one activity to the other. And that less distractible child might not hear the teacher behind them asking them to come and wash their hands or come over
Mhm.
for the other activity. And so, again, it's not that that less distractible child is purposely ignoring you, they're just not catching it.
Mhm. Yes. So picking up on everything around at circle time except the book, or maybe so honed into the book, can't notice the other stuff around.
Absolutely.
Or having trouble,
Absolutely.
doesn't come as easily.
Absolutely.
All right, so what about these kind of school agers?
All right.
Um,
So thinking about one of the big parent-child power struggles of school age, right? It's the big homework word.
yes,
Homework, homework, homework.
yes.
And sometimes parents will, call and say the nemesis of my existence is homework. Yes, all right. So think about the highly distractible school ager. When it comes to homework, they are catching and noticing everything else around them.
Mm,
The cats and the dogs running through the house. They can hear the neighbor kids outside still playing, and they're having to do homework. And so homework can really be a difficult time for a distractible child. And
mhm.
as we think about a child who is less distractible and homework, what might happen is they might be so honed in on their homework that they don't hear their parent calling them down for dinner, or they
Mm,
don't, catch that their timer went off and now they need to go and move to another task. So both ends of the continuum can bring us those parent child power struggles. And one other
absolutely.
thing to mention with that highly distractible child is, remember, if they're really working hard at honing in on their homework, they're going to be exhausted when they're done. And,
Yes.
so there's that potential for those meltdowns after homework because they're so exhausted from trying to not be distractible.
I even think about, like, a lot of times in my family, we would wanna do homework at, like, the kitchen table or something, but then all the sound of cooking and, yes, right by the
Mhm.
window outside and it's like, this actually isn't I learned as I got older, that was not a good place for me to try to do that because I was exhausted from tuning
Mhm.
it out versus it didn't take quite as much energy if I found a space where there wasn't as much to distract me.
Yes.
But it's I get exhausted from having to hone in
Exhausted.
for a long
And our
time.
producer, Mackenzie DeYoung, brought this up as well. And she said, well, think about the distractible child taking tests at school.
Mhm.
After their test, they could be completely exhausted, and then they have to move to the next class.
Yes. And the
Whew.
teacher might expect things of me in this next class, not knowing how wiped I am
Mhm.
from working really hard on that test and not looking at my friend clicking the pen and Yes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Which brings you to the end of the day meltdowns for distractible children. I mean, they've
Mhm.
been honed in all day long at school. You've been honed in all day long at work. Whew, perfect storm happening at 5:30,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Everyone is
are
exhausted
are
from
you in my house at 5:30, Lori? Are you here?
Oh,
All right. So let's move to maybe what's at your house. So
yeah.
looking at some of these older kids. So
So
looking at teens and
my house, parent power struggles happen around chores. And
preteens.
the idea that my teens and preteens, the highly distractible children, and you tell them to go do their chores, well, they might start sweeping and notice that, there's garbage on the floor, pick up the garbage on the floor. Suddenly they realize the garbage is overfull. They take the
Mm.
garbage out the back door. They notice their shoes out the back door. So they bring their shoes up to their bedroom. And pretty soon they're not in the kitchen where I expect them to be sweeping. Right?
Okay, you are at my house, aren't you?
And, so that power
Um,
struggle of why aren't you doing what I asked? Well, because all these other
I
things
am.
distracted me.
Yes,
Can't,
I am cleaning.
right? Can't you praise me for all these
Mm,
other things I did notice that
mhm,
needed to happen? And so, on that high distractibility, highly perceptive end of the spectrum. And so think about the opposite side, that less
mhm.
distractible, less perceptive. The task I sent them to go do was to sweep, and they completed it. And then they left the room. But they didn't notice that, there was garbage overflowing and that they could take the garbage out. They didn't notice on the way out to take the garbage that their shoes were on the steps, that they could have put those away. And so there's
Yeah.
that potential for me to be frustrated and think, well, you only did one thing, you swept. And, in their eyes, well, they
I
completed
did what
the
you asked.
task. I did what you asked.
I didn't
So
even notice the
I
garbage.
didn't even notice the garbage. The garbage is overflowing, huh? So there
Oh,
are those places for those power struggles when it comes to perceptiveness and where we
mhm.
are on that continuum.
Yes. And I think this is a good place to remind everybody, myself included, that yes, it's not about an excuse, right? Understanding this temperament trait is not saying, oh, they don't need to take out the garbage because they just won't notice it. We're not saying that. We're saying understand that your child may not naturally
Mhm.
pick up on those subtle things. And so we might need to be a little more explicit. Or your child was cleaning,
Mhm.
they were just ended up cleaning parts of a lot of different tasks, right?
Yeah,
And so just understanding the place where that might naturally come from for them and
yeah,
what skills we can help them develop.
exactly. Rolling right into that of what skills can we help them develop? Because
Mhm,
remember, we talked about this idea of learning to respond to their
mhm,
natural temperament. And like you said, it's not an excuse to, just keep ignoring the garbage. It allows us that opportunity to respond in a way that's a good fit. We respond
mhm,
and we say, oh gosh, I need to help you remember that after you're done sweeping, why don't you go ahead and check the garbage because you may not have noticed that it was overflowing. And
mhm,
Thomas and Chess, they call this the goodness of fit. And learning to support those natural tendencies really helps us to not blame the child or
yeah,
even blame and shame ourselves. And
yes.
what happens is it maybe makes our parenting easier, and we can
Mhm,
begin to really learn about and understand and then prevent behavior problems in children. So as we look at that natural distractibility, that natural perceptiveness,
mhm,
and pair it with our own, oh, like we said, we may not be surprised to find that they're similar. And
mhm,
and if we look at how to navigate that distractibility or perceptiveness, we essentially find a way to create a better fit.
mm. Yes, and I love that. And it makes me think of, our writer Barb, she talks about this idea of creating space
Mm,
for understanding temperament.
mhm,
Um, and I just love that. And, seeing it as that gift that we value, and as parents, that we understand and explore their temperament, and along the way, we help teach them skills. We help them meet milestones. We have these shared goals of things that they want to accomplish. And so they can successfully navigate the world with that temperament
mhm,
while valuing it. Right? That we're not gonna, okay, well, you never pay attention to blah, 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 blah. So you need to, like, no, you can value that you are a highly perceptive person. I can teach you to value that. And I can help you gain some skills to navigate the world with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And the other thing that happened as she was sharing that with us was we all of a sudden started to think about, we need to add in a section where we talk about what's wonderful.
Yes.
And so
It
thank
is.
you to
It's
her for
wonderful.
leading us in that direction, right?
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about what's wonderful. So when we think about the less perceptive, less distractible trait, whether it's in a child or an adult, what do you think about is wonderful about the less distractible?
Mhm. So this is being highly distractible. It's a little bit easier for me to like relate to that and see that as like a wonderful strength. So I was like, I really want to give thought. This is a wonderful strength. It's a wonderful thing to be less distractible too.
Mm.
And so that ability, I mean, honestly, it just impresses me. Like the ability to like just hone in and on task. And I even think our writer Barb sometimes her ability to multitask because she can tune things out. And I'm just
Oh,
like, yes,
mm,
that is not something that comes very easily to me. And so that's a wonderful thing about a child or a person in general who is less distractible, that ability to hone in.
mm.
What would you say is wonderful?
I definitely, where you said it impresses me, and it impresses me, and I appreciate it. And
Yes.
thank goodness that someone who is less distractible is on our team, like
Yeah.
our writer Barb, because without her, oof, the three of us would just be constantly going off the rails. And so I
Mhm.
appreciate having someone on our team who can keep us honed in when we need to be. Mm,
Absolutely.
it's wonderful.
Yeah, it is indeed wonderful. So what about on the other end of the continuum? What would you say is wonderful about being more highly distractible or more perceptive?
So I do often have to remind people that it is wonderful that, I can find humor and be creative and catch the other things that others are missing, because I am highly distractible. And I was chuckling because sometimes we've talked about how we are just exhausted
Yes.
after recording. And it hit me while we were recording this right now. And I'm
Uh-huh.
thinking, gosh, I hope I didn't miss anything she said, because I was totally thinking about this thought. But that idea of we are exhausted from honing into each other to record the podcast.
Yeah. Weird how that happens to us highly distractible folk. I think of, the wonderful. I shared that my daughter is particularly, more perceptive. And I actually have this picture of her. We were on a walk, and I remember like kind of turning around, like, come on, like, let's go. And so I kind of turned around to like get ready to be like, okay, come on. But I turned around, and right as went to like, I realized she was literally stopping to smell the flowers.
Oh,
And so I have this picture of her stopping to, smelling those flowers. She's like not even two. And it's just the sweetest. But I do literally, that girl
mhm.
stops to smell the flowers. So
That's
I do think that's a wonderful thing. Sometimes with the distractible child, it's like, okay, I'm giving you a direction. Listen to what
mhm.
I'm saying. Do the thing. Don't be distracted. But it is also so wonderful, that ability to take that in, and to notice and stop and smell the
It
flowers.
is.
So
We'll have to think about posting that picture of her alongside the picture of me when I was about 18 months old outside with my grandmother, and I'm smelling the flowers.
really?
Yes.
Oh, that's so sweet. We should. I'm gonna have to dig that picture out.
Future story. Yeah, right. This is
Yes.
future of Millie and Lori. Yes.
Yes, I love that.
All right. So let's talk about our reality. How about it?
So looking at some strategies for you as listeners, now that you kind of have this understanding, or listeners or viewers, whichever you are, of this understanding of distractibility or perceptiveness trait. What are some strategies we have to help our kids who might fall on either end of this continuum?
Yeah, so I look to Mary Sheedy Krasinka's book, Raising Your Spirited Child, when it
Mhm.
comes to some of these techniques, particularly when it comes to that highly distractible, highly perceptive child, because there are a lot of parent power struggles that can happen on that end of the continuum. Now, not to say that there aren't power struggles at the other, And I think that as we talk through these strategies, you'll find that they can be utilized for either end of the continuum.
Yeah.
So, a couple of strategies together here include presenting information in different ways. You might have to present it slower
Mhm.
or without distraction, or
Yes.
even using words or written instructions.
Mm, mhm. Love that one. So for the less distractible child, it's the explicit like, okay, you did this. Nice job completing that whole task. This is the next task. I
Mhm.
explicitly want you to empty the garbage and sweep and wipe the counters.
Exactly.
And for the more distractible child who maybe was noticing the flowers while we maybe were trying to give a direction, the written out instructions also give like,
Yes.
okay, remember to come back. You didn't finish sweeping. Make sure you get back so you can cross that all the way out. So
Mhm.
I love that, the idea of writing it down.
And it's really important to, if you start to hear yourself say, "Well, I told you," and they're kind of looking at you
Like,
with a blank stare, that's a really huge indicator that,
mm,
I might need to write this down and speak the words out loud.
yes.
It's just something
Yes.
you might have to learn to do, is a little of both.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
another strategy that she talks about is using eye contact and keeping it simple. And when I'm talking about eye contact, I'm not saying that phrase we've sometimes maybe heard ourselves saying, which is "look at me when I speak to you."
Oh, yeah.
It's not that at all.
Mhm.
Absolutely not that. It's more the idea that we say something like, "Oh, I can tell you're really focusing on that book. As soon as you look up and see my eyes, I need to tell you something."
Yes. I'll know you're ready to listen when you're looking up. Yes. So like
Exactly.
the opportunity for eye contact, recognizing whether it's because they're focusing on lots of things or honed in on one.
Right.
Yes. The
Yes.
opportunity for the eye contact.
And the other thing to consider here is that with children who are distractible, highly
Mhm.
perceptive, and with children who are not distractible or less perceptive, we're going to find that we're repeating ourselves in multiple ways,
Mm.
multiple different times. And that is something that we just have to get over
Mm.
and recognize I am going to need to say it, write it, perform it, model it multiple times for them because
Mm.
it's their natural temperament.
Yeah.
And if we can get over that annoyance of it and
Mhm.
accept that it is part of them, we suddenly become much more willing to teach them how to work with what they naturally have.
Yes. I honestly feel like I need to like take a breath and take that in. Like, okay, I can expect that I'm gonna need to repeat it, right?
Mhm.
It's not my child being difficult. It's not,
Right.
it's not any of that. It's a part of raising whether my child is highly distractible or
Yes.
less distractible. It's a part of raising my kids that I can expect it will be normal for me to have to repeat myself a lot.
Mhm.
And it's like and I don't have to be mad.
No.
Because it's not them being difficult. It's not necessarily a choice. It's a all right, part of raising my kids is that I'm gonna need to repeat myself a lot for them. Like,
Yes.
there
And
is some
as
power
they
in that for
grow,
me.
there's totally power in that. And as they
Yeah.
grow, you can even say things like, "Okay, so this is actually the 5th time I've said it. And I know that sometimes you miss the first 2 or 3, but this is the 5th one." And as they grow, they're then going to be teaching themselves alongside of us, "Okay, what can I
Mm.
do because this is the 5th time and now I can tell that the irritation in her voice is rising."
Ooh,
So,
yes.
allowing that. So, okay, so another strategy that Mary talks about is maybe including some different motivators for learning,
Mhm.
even things like multimedia messages. So,
Yes.
motivators for learning might include, we think about those, standard sticker charts, or we
Mhm.
think about a motivator for learning earning time on a
Mm,
multimedia device. So,
yeah.
what can we earn that motivates us to stay on task, to,
Mhm.
hone in?
Yes. We talked about the plan in a future episode that my daughter and I actually, you helped us develop, but this like, okay, we need a thorough bedtime routine because staying on task and all the transitions between tasks at bedtime was hard
Mhm.
for us. And so, yes, it was realizing my daughter loved to go to the fountain. like the
Mm.
outside fountain that's in our town, and it was just a few blocks from our house. And so it was like, you know what, we're going to work on doing the plan for a couple
Mhm.
nights in a row. And it was three, just not, she's young, so not a lot, but
Right.
like 3 nights in a row we'll work the plan. And then you know what, the motivator to stay
Mhm.
on task, we're going to go to that fountain.
Mhm.
um, we're excited
Exactly.
because we'll have rested, and talking about why that was relevant, but so
Mhm.
different motivators for different kids.
Exactly. And then another one that she adds is saying what you mean and having clear expectations. And I think about the idea that sometimes we say, go clean your room.
Mm.
Well, okay, well, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for my 15-year-old? What does that mean for me? And what does that mean for my 6-year-old? They can mean completely different things,
Mhm.
even if the child who is 6 or 15 has cleaned their room a dozen times.
Yeah,
This
a dozen
particular
hundred
time,
times.
things are in different spots.
Mm,
It is a different day. The lighting is different. It's a different time of day. And so cleaning the room is so ambiguous.
yes, yes.
Even
What do you mean by clean?
right. So
Vacuum?
giving clear expectations. I need you to
Mm,
pick up your clothes, put them in the laundry, and bring me down the garbage.
yes.
Or whatever your expectations are, just be clear. And then going back up the list, you might have to, write it down. You might have to
Yeah.
give a motivator. You might have to repeat it a couple times in a couple
You
different
have to
ways,
wait till you have eye contact.
right?
Absolutely. So many good strategies there from that book.
Yes,
And no matter what end of the continuum your child is falling on with this trait of perceptiveness and distractibility.
absolutely.
Love
Absolutely.
those.
All right, so maybe it's time to bring in our producer for
Yeah.
our Stop, Breathe, Talk
I might
segment.
need to take another breath.
Yeah. So this is a space where we allow allow. Did you like how I said that? I really actually
We let her.
thought about that word. We
Good.
invite Mackenzie DeYoung in to give us the opportunity to practice some stop, breathe, talk. She gives us a question, and we have absolutely no idea what that question is going to be.
We even tried to fish it out of her
We do.
beforehand. We're like,
We do.
"Well, I mean, today, what are you thinking? Like, what are you
Yeah.
thinking?"
Yeah.
And I said it's about distractibility. I'm honest, but just not
Yeah.
really truthful, right?
Yes.
So today's question is also from Barb. She's been very helpful to come up with some questions that are a little outside the box or things that I don't necessarily think of. So today's question is along the lines of telling the difference between when a child is just distractible versus when they're being disobedient. And or is a child ever disobedient or are they just distractible? Or insert answer here.
That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. Okay. So the basis of that question ends up to land on that idea of motive.
Mm.
So what is the
Mhm.
motive behind the behavior? So the question you said was, is the child just being disobedient or is the child's temperament interfering? And I would answer yes. So what's the motive? So if you have a specific example of, let's say that I've asked my 12-year-old to go and do a chore, right? And they remain seated on the couch where they were watching television. And so I then have to decide, okay, well, Mackenzie and Laura, I've been listening to this podcast. They tell me that I need to expect to repeat myself because my child is not distractible.
Mhm.
And so I am going to probably move into their line of sight and get that eye contact, which was one of the strategies that they told me I should think about. So I'm going to get into their line of sight and I'm going to repeat my request and ask them, did you hear me? If you heard me, can you look up so I know that you actually heard my request?
Mhm.
All right. And then it becomes, do they look up? Did I get their attention? Did I not get their attention? And then what is my tone? Do I have a tone that says, I really want to work this out in a way where you're listening to me and I'm getting my request, finished? And so it depends on that interaction, and it depends on the tone of the interaction. And it also, I mean, you can 100% say to your child, okay, I feel like you're really not listening to me. And I've been known to say that to my 15-year-old or even my 20-year-old. Okay, I'm really sensing that either you didn't hear me or you're purposely not listening. And that's where I bring that humor in, right? And so sometimes as parents, we dance around things. We think, oh, I can't say that to him. Well, why can't I tell my child, I really feel like you're not listening to me? And all of a sudden the child's, whoa, okay, she caught on to my game. I wasn't listening. I was purposely not listening. And so that I do tend to bring in that humor and that playfulness, sometimes just to keep my own tone in check.
Sure.
But I still get the end result. I get the win. The child completes the chore, and we now have this opportunity to have a communication about being honest with me, saying, I kind of feel like you were ignoring me on purpose.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of want to, I feel like we're going around the question while answering the question.
Yeah.
But I want to think about the word disobedient. In particular, is that a term we would use for an adult? And so, and in what situations would we use that word? And so I kind of go back to authoritative parenting, and not that we never have requests of our child or expectations that they need to meet. But is it also balanced with warmth, right? That authoritative parenting has expectations and warmth. And so, yes, my child is reading a book and, hey, I'm trying to get your attention. Hey, I'm trying to get your attention. Hey, listen to me. Right. And it could be on purpose, right? Like, I am upset. I don't want to listen to you ask me to do this because I want to do what I'm doing. Or I'm mad about how things went a little bit ago. And so it's not, there may be times when a child is choosing not to meet your expectation. But I think the warmth part of that is also trying to understand, okay, right now you're working on, right? So if I was going to talk to my co-parent, like, hey, could we pick up the house today? If they said, you know what, right now I'm planning on doing this, we wouldn't call them disobedient. And so I think giving some thought to that of, yes, distractibility is a factor in these things. And yes, our children need to meet the appropriate expectations we have for them, but balancing it with that warmth too, I think comes in.
Sure.
Absolutely. So did we answer it the right way? Maybe not the right way. Did we answer it?
Wasn't really right. I think the question comes from a place of this happening a lot, right? That I know I am highly distractible, and I, as a child, was the kid who, when told to go clean your room, would go in my room and move piles around and sit and reminisce about childhood as a 8-year-old, right? And I still do that, where I sit and I look at things because I get distracted. And for me, it wasn't because I was trying to be a pain. It was just because I was, I want to look at this. I want to look at this. And I know that rings true in at least, one of my nieces and nephews, if not more of them, that sometimes it feels like they're just trying to get under our skin, but really they're distracted. But in some cases, he gives you that little smirk and you're like you're
okay, there's more to the story here.
Smirk of like, okay, go clean your room. So it's just kind of starting that conversation of like, are they doing it on purpose or is it their temperament? So that's kind of
that relationship and connection, like that warmth part of it does help give you a little bit of insight. Like, okay, you are being a sneaky little, like you're being kind of silly.
And I maybe have been known to say, I can see your grin, so I know that you're hearing me. And so how about you make the choice to go finish the task?
Yes. Oh, thanks, Kens and Barb.
Yes, Barb is always helpful.
Helping you out. I'll say, so maybe we should start fishing questions out of Barb instead of trying to fish them out of Mackenzie.
She gives them to me to present.
There you go.
I'll always give her credit when she feeds them to me because I need help sometimes.
Love it.
All right. Bye.
Excellent. Thanks, Kens. So that's perceptiveness and distractibility, right? Understanding how much we're taking in of the world around us. Did we get a little of this trait or a lot? That it plays out at different ages and different developmental milestones. And then, of course, understanding the goodness of fit and the strategies that we can use to help our kids navigate the world with either a lot of distractibility, a little distractibility, or somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely. So there we are for today's Distractibility, Perceptiveness, Temperament podcast in season 3. And we want to thank you for joining us at the Science of Parenting. And remember, subscribe to our weekly and audio podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can also watch our show each week on Facebook. And once in a while, you can even join us live where we might take your comments and questions.
So please come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is a research-based education program hosted by Lori Haynes and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This program is brought to you by Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.